Bugatti Chiron Sport vs. Chiron Pur Sport, this changes everything. Think of it as less of a comparison and more of a rebranding. Some emails are better than others. Case in point, when the Bugatti public relations person asks if you'd like to compare and contrast the Bugatti Chiron Sport against the new Chiron Pur Sport, pronounced Pure Sport, well folks, that's a pretty good email. Yes, I spent a day driving two cars that between them have 3000 HP, 32 cylinders, 8 turbochargers, 128 valves, 20 radiators, and cost north of $7,800,000. That's $3,757,150 for the exposed blue carbon fiber Chiron Sport and $3,959,000 for the jet grey Pur Sport, so you know. We'll get to the difference between them in good time, but first I'd like to tell you a little story about the first time I drove a Bugatti. A Veyron affair. In 2010, Bugatti unveiled the Veyron Super Sport at that year's Pebble Beach Hootenanny. The ultimate Veyron was fresh off its, then, record-setting top-speed assault, where Pierre-Henri Raffanel piloted the 1,200 HP megathing to a Guinness-certified top speed of 268 miles per hour. I was a guest of Bentley at Pebble that year, and as it happened, at dinner I sat directly across from driving Franz Joseph Piefgen, pronounced Pefkin, who at the time was the chief executive officer of both Bentley and Bugatti. I peppered him with questions about Veyron development, as Dr. Piefgen was brought in to fix the Veyron halfway through its evolution from fever dream of Volkswagen Group Übermannsch Ferdinand Piech to its eventual 1,001 PS, 987 SAE horsepower, reality. There were 9 issues, Piefgen explained to me, holding up production of the Veyron, and the good doctor seemed pleased that I cared enough to want to know each and every one. Around the third course, our conversation turned to the Super Sport, and in between bites of something like a medium-rare A5 Wagyu I said, Dr. Piefgen, isn't 268 miles per hour getting silly? I'll never forget his response. He nodded, and then in his deep German accent, replied, yes, I agree with you. Top speed is for the children. The Veyron, as you know, is about acceleration and braking. I replied that I didn't know, as I'd never driven a Veyron. He looked stunned, then pointed his large finger at me. You've never driven a Veyron? He asked rhetorically. He then turned a few degrees to my left, pointed that same finger at the PR woman seated beside me and declared, this man must drive a Veyron. A few minutes later my phone was exploding, would tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. work for you? It's good to dine with the king. That next morning, I drove a Veyron, a topless Grand Sport, for the first time. Since then, I've driven more than my fair share of the world's first hypercar, including a regular Veyron and a couple of Vitesses, the 1,184 HP Targa-topped final Veyrons, one of which used to belong to Arnold Schwarzenegger, cigar burn on the leather and everything. The 1,479 HP Chiron succeeded the Veyron in 2016, but until now I'd never driven one. I mentioned that I just drove two, yet. Chiron song. The Chiron Sport is, shocker, a sportier version of the Chiron. To put the idea into more digestible Porsche terms, going from Chiron to Chiron Sport is like going from a 911 Carrera S to a 911 GTS. Nothing too crazy has happened, but the result is a better driving car. Specifically, the Sport is 40 pounds lighter, has better aero, a torque vectoring differential on the rear axle, and rides on a stiffer suspension. The incredibly attractive full carbon fiber turquoise blue example I drove came loaded with $509,150 in options. To be fair, the exposed carbon accounts for $315,000, and things such as the $71,300 wheels and $62,000 French blue leather and carbon interior make up the rest. To be fairer, the wheels are fantastic. Full price is, again, $3,757,150, more than most mid-century masterpiece homes I spend too much time lusting over on Redfin and Zillow that I also can't afford. For those wondering, I try to block the price from my brain while driving cars like this. It's the only way. What's 1,500 metric horsepower like? Silly. As Dr. Piefjan said about the Veyron, the Chiron Sport is LF about acceleration. Also, forget about the horsepower. Instead, concentrate on the 1180 lb-ft of thunderous, hammer-time torque that's available from 2000 rpm until 6000 rpm, redline happens at 6700. Those aren't even the interesting numbers. We know this particular sport has cleared the quarter mile in less than 9.5 seconds at nearly 160 miles per hour. Kids, that's a production street legal car that you can buy. Well, you can't buy one, but there are a couple of dozen humans who can. The initial acceleration isn't scary. I mean, more than 4,500 pounds moving so quickly should frighten the pants off most observers and passengers. Spoiled old me has experienced the same sort of launch in cars such as the Tesla Model S P100D Ludicrous, Porsche 911 Turbo S, and the McLaren 765 LT.